Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, the 3rd of February, and we continue looking at some of the teaching that Paul is giving to the church in Galatians, and at chapter 4 today. And again, Paul speaks with such exasperation as he tries to counter the very negative input he claims from those who wish to follow some kind of law in the way in which they celebrate and practice and live out their Christian faith. And I gave some examples yesterday that principally Paul was speaking about those who wanted to get and make sure that all Christians were had their foreskins cut off. And Paul was saying, but why? Why do you need to be circumcised? What is it that makes that a rule that supersedes everything else? And he draws this very interesting analogy of Abraham, who had the two children, one by the promise from God, which seemed in Abraham and Sarah's thinking to come very late, Isaac, who is technically second born because Abraham and Sarah had decided that they need to make God's promise come true, that it wasn't going to be entirely God's work. And so Abraham had a firstborn son, Ishmael, by the servant lady Hagar, the slave girl, they refer to it in Scripture. And Paul draws this interesting analogy, and he says, as Christians, we are inheritors of the promise that was given to Isaac. And if I can introduce my own analogy, as I understand this, Isaac was born into a world that had an open horizon. There was tremendous prospect and potential as God dealt with Isaac, and Isaac could learn and grow into something that would be powerful and new and was in fact for the whole world. Whereas Ishmael was born into a life where he was banished out into the desert. His horizons were very closed. He had no promise in front of him. And Paul draws this analogy, interestingly, of that scenario. And he says, as Christians, we are more like Isaac. We have this open horizon. Now, of course, for Isaac, it wasn't that anything goes. There's sort of a belief in the world today that anything goes. And that's not the point in Christianity. There are definitely boundaries, and Scripture is full of that. For example, no idolatry, no fornication and sexual immorality, no anger and hatred, no murder, don't steal from people, respect others around you, especially your elders and your parents. The two great commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind and your strength, just as you love, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And the other commandment, to go out into all the world and preach the good news, share this message, because the horizon for the world is so closed. And as Christians, we have this broad, open horizon. We're not hemmed in by rules and regulations of there's only one way to worship, and there's only one set of food that you can eat on a Sunday, and there's only one way to dress, and there's only one way to worship, that we must worship, and we must dress modestly and properly, but we cannot be dictated to by those who love the law. Paul says these are people like Ishmael. They live under the law, and they will be judged by that law. So, dear friends, what is your horizon? Is it open and unfettered and great potential within the boundaries of knowing God and having a relationship with Him? Or are you bound by laws and what your people and your neighbors and your pastor or your whatever is going to say to you? Where do you exist? Have that relationship with God. Have your boundaries open. Be like Isaac rather than like Ishmael. Folks, have a wonderful day, and we'll chat again tomorrow. God bless.